Gary Trent Jr. of the Toronto Raptors have recently become a very popular trade target, and I believe if the Raptors trade him, they're gonna get some pretty good value in return. Ever since signing an extension this summer with the Raptors, Gary Trent has instantly found a home in Toronto. But with the Raptors right now still trying to upgrade their team during this year's NBA trade deadline, Gary Trent Jr. is one of their most likely and disposable players they can trade away, but of course get great return. And one team that's super interested in Gary Trent is the Los Angeles Lakers. Rob Pelinka has made it known officially and of course vocally that the Lakers have expressed interest in Gary Trent Jr. Rob Pelinka called Masai Ujiri to talk about a potential deal where Gary Trent comes to the purple and gold. And for this video, I'm gonna speak this scenario into existence, meaning giving you guys ideas of a potential trade where the Lakers actually get Gary Trent Jr. And then on the Raptors' perspective, get some future assets to build for their future. Because we know that Masai Ujiri in the past has proven to pull the plug and of course make big time deals. But not just Masai Ujiri, so has Rob Pelinka. This deal will consist of two of the most popular general managers going at it and of course working something out. So if you're a big Lakers and Raptors fan just like me, let's talk about a potential trade scenario revolving Gary Trent Jr. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to a very special episode of Easy Buckets. My name is Soom and I make basketball videos every single day. So if you're new, be sure to hit the subscribe button, turn on post notifications to not miss any of my upcoming videos. If you watched this video and you loved it, be sure to smash that thumbs up button. I greatly appreciate it. It would help out the channel a lot. Just a quick shout out to EBL for being a special Easy Buckets gang member on the channel, being a channel member. Thank you so much for being a part of the journey and I can't wait to grow with you. And of course, if you want to be a part of the Easy Gang, go check out our membership perks down in the description below. All the information is there. But without wasting any more time, let's talk about Gary Trent Jr. being traded. So far this season, Gary Trent Jr. has been absolutely phenomenal. He just turned 23 years old, and as the starting shooting guard for the Raptors, he's averaging nearly 18 points per game, 2.8 rebounds, 2.0 assists, 1.9 steals per game, and 0.3 blocks. And when talking about their head coach of Nick Nurse's coaching, there are some nights he plays Gary Trent Jr. 40 plus minutes. With Gary Trent being super young and having the hustle ability and the floor spacing ability, he is super valuable to the Raptors and right now is picking up a lot of interest. A fun fact to note is ever since January 25th, 5 games in, the Raptors have won with Gary Trent Jr. dropping plus 30 points per game. Over the past 2 weeks, ever since January 25th, Gary Trent Jr. has been averaging 32 points per game, 4 rebounds, 1.5 assists, 2.0 steals, and shooting an efficient clip of 48% at the field goal mark, and of course, averaging 6 threes made per game. Gary Trent Jr. has been unstoppable, and honestly, his trade stock is simply increasing right now. And on the Lakers' perspective, the report of them being interested in Gary Trent came out 2 weeks ago. So of course, right now with Gary Trent Jr. putting up monster numbers, Masai Ujiri has the ability to of course expect and ask for more in a potential Gary Trent Jr. trade. As I mentioned earlier, Gary Trent Jr. is only 23 years old and was the second round pick in the 2018 NBA draft. He built a name for himself on the Portland Trail Blazers, ended up getting traded from the Blazers to the Raptors last season for Norman Powell, and then of course signed a contract extension, which of course kept him in Toronto. He got the bag, but is simply still living up to it and still playing basketball out of his mind. So now the question is, how can the Lakers get Gary Trent Jr.? What is the potential deal? And of course, what can get Masai Ujiri interested? The first trade I'm proposing is the Lakers offering up Talen Horton-Tucker, Kendrick Nunn, and a 2026 first swap pick in exchange for Gary Trent Jr. This trade right here is what I believe the Lakers want to offer Masai Ujiri and the Raptors to get a deal done. Of course, go back a month ago when Gary Trent Jr. wasn't putting up monster numbers, this trade could possibly go through because THT is 21 years old. He's younger than Gary Trent Jr., is on a cheaper deal, and of course still on contract for 2 seasons. And on the other hand, getting Kendrick Nunn to being a backup point guard behind Fred VanVleet, I believe that's a great idea as Nunn is only 26 years old as well. And of course, getting a first round future asset is great in Masai Ujiri's opinion. But now with Gary Trent Jr. averaging about 30 points over the past 2 weeks, Masai Ujiri is gonna 100% demand more if they're gonna expend and trade away Gary Trent Jr., which is why I believe this second scenario makes more sense for the Raptors to accept. And it's the Lakers offering up THT, Kendrick Nunn, Malik Monk gets added into the deal, and that first round pick in exchange for Gary Trent Jr. And I'm also gonna put Isaac Bonga in this deal for salary matching and roster capabilities, and of course roster size. In this deal, the biggest addition has to be Malik Monk, where the Raptors feel that if they lose a scoring caliber floor spacer, a scoring caliber shooter of Gary Trent Jr., they bring in someone like Malik Monk, who has a similar playing style, of course can still learn more, can still develop more, is the same age as Gary Trent Jr., that of course they can re-sign in this upcoming offseason to be the next Gary Trent Jr., as Malik Monk won't expect a lot of money as he's in that phase of trying to prove himself in the NBA. Of course, on the Lakers' perspective, I don't believe they do want to trade away Malik Monk. He's a valuable piece to their team. But of course, on the Raptors' perspective, I do believe Masai Ujiri has the right to demand more if a trade were to go down. But I have one more trade scenario where it's more of a blockbuster deal, and it's the Lakers putting Russell Westbrook in this situation and putting Russell Westbrook in this scenario. And of course, you would never think that the Lakers would trade Russell Westbrook for Gary Trent Jr. But for the Lakers, I'm saying this now, if they trade Russell Westbrook to the Raptors, I do believe they could get some valuable pieces to help them for their championship run this year. And this would be the ultimate blockbuster deal. It will be the Lakers offering up Russell Westbrook, Kendrick Nunn, Kent Bazemore, and a future first round pick in exchange for Gary Trent Jr., of course, Goran Dragic, Chris Boucher, and Kem Birch. I believe this is a really good deal that gives the Lakers depth, and then of course gives the Raptors a new superstar to potentially build around. Right now, with the Raptors having Fred VanVleet as their main point guard, there are some talks out there that maybe Fred VanVleet can't lead the team as a starting point guard. And that's why I believe Russell Westbrook could basically turn the team like he did for the Wizards last year and give them a better shot at making the playoffs. I believe Russell Westbrook for sure is a Gary Trent Jr. upgrade. And then of course, right now with the Raptors not even having Goran Dragic play, of course the Lakers get a backup point guard, a veteran that can help at the floor spacing and of course help LeBron James, as if they lose Russell Westbrook, they get good quality depth. Chris Boucher on the other hand right now is a very popular Raptors trade target, as Nick Nurse is not giving him minutes, he's not getting the expectation that we all thought he would be, he's not getting the touches, and that's why I do believe a Russell Westbrook trade can give the Lakers good quality depth, give these players a new scenery. But then on the Raptors perspective, they're bringing in a superstar where they never really had one ever since DeMar DeRozan and of course Kawhi Leonard. Raptor fans, Laker fans, what do you guys think about this blockbuster deal in front of you? There's not really much talk about it, but of course I'm putting it out there right now. So yes guys, this wraps up my video today talking about the possibility of the Raptors trading away Gary Trent Jr. to the Lakers. What's most important to me is I want to know your thoughts. Do you believe the Raptors would trade Gary? And of course, could the Lakers have a good chance? Put your thoughts down in the comments below. But other than that, take it easy, God bless, and I'll see you all next time on Easy Buckets. Whoa!